He was just a kid from Detroit, born Marshall Bruce Mathers III in 1972. And right from the start, life didn't go easy on him. His father walked out when he was just a baby, leaving his young mother to raise him alone. They moved from place to place, barely scraping by. Marshall never had a permanent home. One day, he was sleeping in one broken-down house, the next day in another. "We never stayed anywhere long enough to unpack," he would later say. For a little boy, this wasn't just tough, it was soul-crushing. He was lonely, shy, and constantly bullied at school. He was the quiet kid in the back of the classroom, drawing comic book characters, making up stories in his head to escape the chaos around him. But outside those classroom walls, life wasn't any kinder. He was beaten up, humiliated, and once even left in a coma for a week after a schoolyard fight. As he grew up, he started turning that pain into rhymes. He didn't know it yet, but music was going to save his life. Marshall dropped out of high school at 17, not because he was lazy, but because he had failed the 9th grade 3 times. School wasn't built for a kid like him. Words and rhymes were his real education. By the time most teenagers were thinking about college, he was working minimum wage jobs, washing dishes, bussing tables, and coming home to scribble lyrics in a notebook late at night. He had nothing, no money, no father, no real direction. But he had one thing: a burning hunger to make something of himself. And that hunger led him to Detroit's underground rap battles. Imagine a skinny white kid standing in a circle of black rappers, spitting verses faster than anyone could believe. At first, the crowd laughed. "What's this white boy doing here?" But then he opened his mouth and silence fell. His words cut through the room like a blade. He wasn't just rhyming, he was telling his life story, and it was raw, painful, and real. The more they booed him, the harder he fought back with his lyrics. This was the birth of Eminem, not the superstar yet, but the fighter. And in those smoky clubs, facing rejection after rejection, he learned the most important lesson of his life. If the world doesn't give you a place, you make one yourself. When the world turns its back, Marshall's journey into music wasn't some overnight fairy tale. The underground battles gave him respect, but respect doesn't pay the rent. He was living in poverty, barely able to afford diapers for his baby daughter, Haley, who had just been born. He worked long shifts, sometimes 60 hours a week, but it was never enough. And when he finally had a few spare hours, he would sit on the floor, headphones on, pen in hand, turning his rage and frustration into verses. But life didn't just stay hard. It got harder. He recorded his first album, Infinite, in 1996, pouring everything he had into it. He thought this was it. This was his shot. But when it dropped, the world barely noticed. The critics weren't kind either. Some called it a nice copy. Others said his voice didn't fit the genre. Imagine putting every ounce of yourself into something, only to have it dismissed like it never existed. The pressure broke him. He lost his job, was evicted from his home, and in a moment of hopelessness, he even attempted to take his own life. He woke up in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, "Is this what my life is going to be? Is this it?" But something inside him refused to quit. He had a daughter now. He couldn't just give up. That's when he created the alter ego that would change his destiny. Slim Shady. Slim was wild, fearless, and unapologetic. Through him, Marshall said the things he was too scared to say. He turned his pain into dark humor, his anger into punchlines. His Slim Shady EP was raw, aggressive, and unlike anything rap had heard before. It wasn't just music, it was therapy. And then something incredible happened. His demo landed in the hands of Dr. Dre, the legendary producer. Dre heard the tape, rewound it, and said, "Find him. I don't care how long it takes." It was the moment Marshall had been waiting for. The moment where the universe finally whispered, "Get up, you're not done yet." But this wasn't the happy ending. This was just the beginning. Because once the world opened the door, Marshall had to prove he belonged, and he was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. The day the door opened, it was 1998, when Marshall Mathers finally stepped into Dr. Dre's studio. Picture this, Dre, a legend with platinum records on the wall, and Marshall, a broke rapper from Detroit, standing there in a white t-shirt, nervous but ready. Dre hit play on a beat, a slow, thumping rhythm, and Marshall started freestyling on the spot. Dre looked at him, grinned, and said, "Yo, that's it. That's the one." From that moment, the energy between them was electric. They recorded track after track, sometimes finishing entire songs in a single day. Dre didn't just produce him. He believed in him when almost nobody else did. Together, they created the Slim Shady LP, an album that was raw, outrageous, and full of Marshall's sharp humor and pain. When the album dropped in 1999, the world finally turned its head. Here was this bleach blonde, razor-tongued rapper saying things nobody had dared to say on a mainstream stage. His songs were controversial, violent, hilarious, and heartbreakingly honest, all at once. "Hi, my name is" became an anthem. Suddenly, the kid from Detroit who once couldn't afford rent was on MTV, on the radio, and performing on late-night shows. But fame came with its own storm. Reporters questioned if his lyrics were too dangerous. Parents protested outside record stores. Politicians tried to shut him down. And Marshall, he didn't back off. He said, "If you don't like what I'm saying, don't listen." His music was never about playing it safe. It was about telling the truth, even if it hurt. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Marshall was still fighting battles. The cameras never saw custody battles for Haley, his rocky relationship with Kim, his exhaustion from endless tours. Success didn't erase the pain. It just gave him a bigger stage to scream from. But with the Slim Shady LP, Eminem had done the impossible. He had taken the rage of a broken childhood, the humiliation of failure, and turned it into art that spoke to millions. The door was open now, and Marshall wasn't just stepping through it. He was kicking it off the hinges when the world started watching. By the year 2000, Marshall Mathers was no longer just a rapper from Detroit. He was a cultural earthquake. The release of the Marshall Mathers LP changed everything. This wasn't just an album, it was a statement, a window into Marshall's world that was unfiltered and explosive. Tracks like Stan and The Real Slim Shady didn't just climb the charts, they became moments in music history. His words were dangerous, brilliant, and brutally honest. The album shattered records, selling millions within weeks, and suddenly Eminem was everywhere. Magazine covers, award shows, late-night interviews. But fame isn't just about flashing lights. The bigger he became, the more pressure he faced. Reporters dug into his personal life. Critics called him a menace, and protest groups demanded his music be banned. But Marshall didn't stop. He said in interviews, "I'm just saying what's in my head. If people relate, that's because it's real." Yet, with all this fame, Marshall's personal life was spinning out of control. The relationship with Kim was breaking apart in public. Custody battles for Haley were becoming ugly headlines. Every lyric he wrote, every outburst he had, was front-page news. It was as if the entire world was watching him bleed. And instead of looking away, they wanted more. This was also the time Marshall faced himself. The parties, the touring, the chaos, it all started catching up. But instead of backing down, he used the mic as his therapy. He poured his darkest emotions into his music. Songs like Stan revealed a deeper, more vulnerable side, warning about the dangers of fame and obsession. The world was beginning to see that Eminem wasn't just a rapper. He was a storyteller, a poet who could turn pain into poetry. At the peak of this storm came an unexpected twist: Hollywood. Marshall took a risk and stepped into acting, playing a version of his own life in the movie 8 Mile. It was a gamble, but it paid off beyond anyone's imagination. Lose Yourself, the anthem from the film, became one of the most iconic songs in music history, winning him an Oscar. But even with all the glory, a darker shadow was growing in Marshall's life, one that fame couldn't fix and money couldn't silence, drowning in the spotlight. By the early 2000s, Marshall had everything he once dreamed of: fame, money, awards, respect. But behind the curtain, he was falling apart. The pressure of the music industry, the constant media attacks, the custody battles, and the relentless spotlight had pushed him to the edge. To numb the pain, he turned to pills. At first, it was just to escape for a moment, to quiet the noise in his head. But soon it became something darker, an addiction that started running his life. Marshall would later admit he was taking handfuls of prescription drugs every day, barely functioning. His friends and family were worried, but he kept saying, "I'm fine, I can handle it." Deep down, he knew he couldn't. He was spiraling, and the man who once turned pain into music now found it hard to even write. His albums during this time still sold, but critics could feel something was off. The fire that had fueled Slim Shady seemed dimmer. Then came the breaking point. In 2006, tragedy struck when Proof, Eminem's best friend, hype man, and closest brother, was shot and killed. Proof wasn't just a friend. He was the one who pushed Marshall into rap battles, the one who believed in him before anyone else did. His death shattered Eminem. The grief sent him deeper into addiction. And soon he wasn't just losing his passion. He was losing himself. There was a night that nearly ended everything. Marshall overdosed on methadone and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors told him bluntly if he had been 2 hours later, he would have died. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines keeping him alive, he had a moment of clarity. He thought about Haley. He thought about what she would grow up hearing, that her father was a genius. But he let the demons win, and something inside him said, "No, this can't be the end." Marshall decided he had one last fight left, not against the critics, not against other rappers, but against himself. And if he could survive this, he was going to come back stronger than ever. The fight for redemption. When Marshall walked out of the hospital, he knew the hardest battle of his life was just beginning. Detoxing wasn't glamorous, it was brutal. Days blurred into nights as he fought withdrawal, sweated through fevers, and battled cravings that screamed louder than any crowd he had ever faced. But he stayed, he pushed, and slowly, the fog began to lift. For the first time in years, his mind was clear. and with that clarity came purpose. He started writing again. At first, the words didn't come easy. He was rusty, unsure if he still had the fire that once made him unstoppable. But each verse, each rhyme, was like taking back a piece of himself. He was building a new Marshall, a new Eminem, from the ground up, this time sober, this time sharper. In 2009, he dropped Relapse, his first album after recovery. The world was watching, wondering if Eminem still had it. The album was dark, twisted, full of Slim Shady's raw, outrageous energy. Some loved it, some criticized it. But for Marshall, it wasn't about perfection. It was proof that he was still standing. Then came Recovery in 2010, and this time, he didn't just stand, he roared. Songs like Not Afraid and Love the Way You Lie showed a side of Eminem that was brutally honest, vulnerable, and inspiring. This wasn't just Slim Shady throwing punches. This was Marshall Mathers talking about his demons and how he beat them. The album became a global phenomenon, earning him Grammy Awards and re-establishing him as one of the greatest rappers alive. But what made this era truly special was how open he became about his struggles. In interviews, he admitted, "I almost died. I had to rebuild my entire life." Fans around the world connected with his honesty, seeing him not just as a rapper, but as someone who had been to the bottom and climbed back out. Marshall was sober, focused, and more determined than ever. He was no longer running from his past. He was using it as fuel. The comeback was complete, but Eminem wasn't done. He was about to prove that even after everything, he could still dominate the game. The legend strikes back. By the time Recovery had conquered the charts, Marshall was back in fighting shape, and the rap world knew it. But he wasn't satisfied with just being back. He wanted to remind everyone why he was considered one of the greatest to ever pick up a mic. In 2013, he dropped the Marshall Mathers LP2, a bold return to the album that had made him a global icon. The pressure was huge. How do you follow up one of the most legendary albums of all time? He did it by proving he had only gotten sharper. Tracks like Rap God became instant classics, with Eminem spitting over 1,500 words in 6 minutes, breaking records for speed and complexity. It wasn't just music, it was a masterclass. Fans were in awe, critics were stunned, and younger rappers were reminded that the throne wasn't up for grabs just yet. But Marshall wasn't just celebrating victories, he was still taking aim. In 2018, after releasing Revival to mixed reviews, he shocked the world with Kamikaze, a surprise album where he went after every critic, every doubter, and every rapper who dared to take shots at him. The anger, the fire, the unapologetic Slim Shady energy, it was all there. He proved that he didn't just survive the game, he could still dominate it. And then came Music to be Murdered By in 2020, another surprise drop. Another reminder that Eminem could reinvent himself anytime he wanted. The album was dark, creative, and lyrically loaded, showing that Marshall wasn't slowing down. Even decades into his career, outside the booth, Marshall became more private, focusing on raising Haley and staying sober. He rarely did interviews, rarely showed up in public, but every time he released music, the world stopped and listened. At this stage, Marshall Mathers wasn't just a rapper anymore. He was a living legend, a man who had gone from a bullied kid in Detroit to one of the most respected artists in music history. And yet, even with all the fame, awards, and legacy, he still sounded hungry every time. He grabbed a mic, like the underdog who still had something to prove. The man behind the mic. As Marshall's career roared on, something inside him shifted. The man who once lived in chaos started craving peace. Fame had taken so much from him: privacy, trust, even pieces of himself. But one thing he refused to lose was his daughter, Haley. Through every scandal, every court battle, every headline, she remained his anchor. "Everything I do is for her," he once said, and you could hear it in his music. Haley wasn't just mentioned in a few songs. She was the heartbeat of Marshall's entire journey. He rapped about wanting to give her a better life, about the guilt he carried for not always being there, about his desperate fight to protect her from the madness of fame. Fans grew up hearing her name in tracks like Mockingbird and Haley's song, and it reminded everyone that behind the Slim Shady persona was a father who just wanted to be better. Away from the stage, Marshall became a very private man. The wild Slim Shady antics that once defined him slowly faded. No more late-night parties, no more chaos. He kept a small circle of friends, stayed close to family, and focused on staying sober. In interviews, he admitted that he now spends most of his time writing, working out, and watching Haley grow into an independent woman. There's a quiet strength in this version of Marshall. He's not chasing controversy anymore. He's not trying to prove himself to every critic. Instead, he's focused on leaving behind a legacy that Haley and his fans can be proud of. When he does step out in public, like at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, induction, or a surprise Super Bowl performance, the crowd erupts, proving that his presence is still electric even after decades in the game. This stage of his life shows the human side of Eminem. The man who laughs with his daughter. The man who still writes bars at 3 a.m. The man who understands that survival was his greatest victory. Behind the fame, the platinum records, the controversies, Marshall Mathers found something far more valuable. Peace with himself, voice that never fades. Marshall Mathers has lived long enough to see the rap game transform. Yet his name still commands respect. In a world where new artists rise and fall every year, Eminem remains untouchable, a standard that even the next generation of rappers measure themselves against. Young artists openly call him their inspiration, their blueprint, the reason they ever picked up a pen. It's not just his speed or his rhyme schemes. It's his story, his refusal to quit when everything told him to. Marshall reflects on his past with brutal honesty. In rare interviews, he talks about the mistakes he made, the anger he carried, the people he hurt, and the times he almost didn't make it out alive. "If I could talk to the younger me," he once said, "I'd tell him to slow down, but I'd also tell him not to give up. Because everything you're going through is gonna turn you into the person you need to be." Today, when Eminem drops a verse, whether it's on a surprise single or a guest feature, the internet stops. People dissect every bar, every punchline, every layered rhyme. He's no longer just competing with other rappers. He's competing with his own legacy, trying to outdo himself with every line. And somehow, he still manages to shock people with his precision and creativity. But beyond the music, Marshall has become a mentor figure. He founded Shady Records, helping launch careers for artists like 50 Cent and others, giving them the opportunities he once fought so hard for. He supports causes in Detroit, rebuilding parts of the city that raised him. He doesn't just rap about survival anymore. He helps others survive. The wild Slim Shady persona might have mellowed, but the fire is still there, burning in every track. Fans who grew up with his music now play his songs for their kids, proving that Eminem isn't just an artist of a generation. He's an artist of generations. Marshall Mathers is no longer running from his demons. He faced them, fought them, and turned them into verses that changed music forever. His voice might sound calmer now, but the message is still loud. You can fall, you can break, but you can always rise again. Rise from the shadows. Eminem's story isn't just about rap, fame, or records broken. It's about survival. From a bullied kid in Detroit with no father, no stability, and almost no hope, to one of the most influential artists in music history, Marshall Mathers embodies the idea that your past doesn't define your future. Every setback, every heartbreak, every mistake he made could have ended him. But he chose to fight, and that fight is the real legacy. Marshall once said, "The truth is, I never gave up. Even when I was at my lowest, even when the pills had me cornered, I kept writing, I kept rhyming, I kept dreaming." That relentless determination is what makes his life story more than just a career. It's a lesson. Success didn't come from talent alone. It came from resilience, from turning pain into art, and from refusing to let the world tell him who he was. He teaches us that life will throw everything at you: poverty, betrayal, addiction, loss. But it's how you respond that defines you. Haley, his daughter, the people who doubted him, the critics, the dark nights alone on Detroit's streets, they all became fuel for his fire. Eminem transformed suffering into lyrics that inspired millions, proving that even the deepest wounds can give birth to greatness. And yet, beneath the superstar persona, he remains human. He laughs, he loves, he struggles, he falls, and he gets back up. He reminds us that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. Sharing your story, admitting your flaws, and confronting your fears is what makes you powerful. Eminem didn't just rap about life. He lived it, survived it, and turned it into a blueprint for anyone fighting to rise above their circumstances. Marshall Mathers' journey is a testament to one simple truth. No matter where you start, no matter how many times you fail, no matter how heavy the shadows are, you can rise. You can redefine yourself. You can create a legacy that outlives the struggles. And when you do, you inspire the world along the way. So, if there's one thing to take from Eminem's life, it's this: embrace the struggle, harness your pain, and never, ever give up. Because the only thing standing between you and your destiny is yourself.